I was running late. The GPS kept recalculating my route, leading me further and further off the main highway. It had started with a minor detour due to road construction, but now I was driving down a narrow, cracked road through dense woods. The sun had set, and my headlights illuminated nothing but trees and fog. A notification popped up on the screen. Recalculating, 15 minutes to destination. Finally, I saw houses ahead. Small, old-fashioned cottages with white picket fences, neatly trimmed hedges, and warm porch lights. A sign on the side of the road read, "Welcome to Coldbrook." I hadn't heard of it before. It wasn't on the map. Slowing down, I noticed something strange. The town was eerily quiet. No cars, no dogs barking, no movement. Yet there were people. A woman stood near a stroller, her hands resting on the handle. A man sat on a bench, a newspaper in his hands. A teenage boy leaned against a bike. An elderly couple stood near a shop window. But they weren't moving. I pulled over, cutting the engine. The silence was unnatural, pressing in on me like a thick fog. I stepped out. The air was cold, and my breath formed misty clouds. Something felt wrong. I walked toward the woman with the stroller. She stood perfectly still, gazing at something far beyond me. Her eyes were vacant, glassy. I waved a hand in front of her face. Nothing. The baby in the stroller wasn't moving either. Not even the rise and fall of breathing. I reached out, hesitated, then lightly touched the woman's hand. Her skin was warm, too warm, as if she were alive, as if she had just stopped mid-motion. A shiver ran down my spine. I turned around. The man with the newspaper, the teenager, the elderly couple, none of them had moved. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. But no one was there. The woman with the stroller hadn't moved. Neither had the others. But something was different. Their heads were turned ever so slightly toward me. I stumbled back toward my car. My fingers fumbled with the door handle as panic took hold. I needed to get out of here. I slid into the driver's seat, shoved the key into the ignition, and turned it. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. My breath came in short gasps. I checked my phone, no signal. I forced myself to look up. The people. They were closer. The woman with the stroller, the man with the newspaper, the teenage boy with the bike. All of them had shifted, without a single movement, without a sound. They were now only a few feet away, their vacant, frozen expressions locked onto me. And then, in the quiet of that impossible village, I heard a whisper. "Stay." I twisted the key again, harder this time. The engine let out a choking sound but refused to start. My pulse pounded in my ears as I dared to glance up again. They were even closer. The woman with the stroller was almost touching my driver's side window now. Her lifeless, glassy eyes locked onto mine. The baby in the stroller hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked. The man with the newspaper was behind her, his mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-sentence. They were watching me. No, not watching. Waiting. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in frustration. Start. Damn it. The car coughed and sputtered, the headlights flickering for a split second before dying again. Then I saw something that made my stomach drop. The baby blinked. Not slowly, not sleepily, but sharply, too fast, too mechanical. I recoiled against my seat. My breath hitched in my throat. And then, all at once, the lights in every house on the street shut off. Darkness swallowed the village. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, coming from every direction. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the door handle, about to make a run for it, when my headlights flickered back on. And what I saw froze me in place. The entire village had shifted. The woman, the man, the teenager, the elderly couple, they were now standing in a perfect circle around my car. Closer than before, their vacant faces only inches from the windows. But something was wrong with them. Their eyes were wide now, stretched too far open. Their mouths hung slack, as if trying to scream but unable to make a sound. The baby's head had tilted too far to the side. Its tiny lips parted in an unnatural smile. I slammed my hand against the horn. The blaring sound echoed through the still night, but the people didn't even flinch. Couldn't breathe. I had to get out. I reached for my phone again, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. No signal. No GPS. Then the whisper came again, so close it felt like it was inside my own head. Stay. My whole body broke out in a cold sweat. The figures outside took a step closer. One. Unified. Step. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the door open, ready to bolt. A hand clamped around my wrist. I screamed. It was the woman with the stroller. Her grip was ironclad, unnaturally strong. Her fingers burned against my skin, as if her warmth was something inhuman. I thrashed against her hold, but she didn't even blink. Her lips trembled, as if trying to move. Then, in a voice that wasn't her own, a deep, guttural voice that sounded like many people speaking at once, she whispered, "You shouldn't have stopped." I yanked my arm as hard as I could, but the woman's grip was unbreakable. Her fingers dug into my skin, burning hot, as if something inside her was alive but barely contained. Her mouth twitched again. The dead glassiness in her eyes didn't change, but her lips parted ever so slightly, and she whispered again, in that awful, layered voice, "You shouldn't have stopped." A shudder crawled down my spine. The others stood motionless, but I could feel something shifting beneath their skin, something not human. Then, the baby in the stroller turned its head toward me. Not slowly, not like an actual child. It snapped. The movement was jerky, mechanical, like a puppet being yanked by invisible strings. It was looking right at me. That was it. I lost it. I screamed, jerking backward with everything I had, throwing myself against the car. The woman's fingers finally released me, but the sensation of her burning touch lingered, leaving a searing imprint on my wrist. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over myself. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move fast enough. And then, they all took a step forward. At the same time, a perfectly synchronized step. I turned and bolted. I didn't care where I was going, just away. Away from the people, away from the whispering voices, away from whatever the hell was happening in this godforsaken village. The houses loomed around me, their windows like black eyes, watching. The streets stretched endlessly, more figures frozen in place, as if they had been waiting for me all along. A narrow alley came into view, tucked between two houses. A way out. I darted toward it. As soon as I stepped into the alley, the whispers stopped. Silence. Complete and total silence. I could still see the villagers behind me. They had stopped moving. But something was different now. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking past me. Slowly, I turned my head. The alley wasn't empty. There was something standing at the other end. It was tall. Too tall. A gaunt, towering figure. Its body unnaturally thin. Its limbs too long. Its face, if it even had one, was nothing but a smooth, featureless void. But the worst part? It was twitching. Not moving, twitching. Like a broken machine, its body jerking in sharp, unnatural angles. It was blocking the only way out. And then, it started running. Not walking. Sprinting. Straight toward me. I didn't think. I just ran. My legs moved on instinct, pushing me back the way I came. The thing at the end of the alley was too fast. It didn't just move, it glitched. 1 second it was 20 feet away, the next it was almost on me. Its limbs jerked unnaturally, spasming like a marionette whose strings were being yanked too hard. I barely made it out of the alley, diving back onto the main street, and the villagers had moved again. They were even closer now, surrounding me in a wide circle. Their heads tilted at the exact same angle, their unblinking eyes locked onto me. I spun, trying to find an escape. The thing in the alley stopped. It stood at the entrance, just beyond the reach of the streetlights, its twitching slowing down. And then, in that same distorted, many-voiced whisper, it spoke. "You don't belong here." My entire body went cold. I turned back to my car. The door was open. I didn't leave it open, but I didn't care. I ran for it. The villagers didn't move to stop me. They just watched. I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. The villagers didn't react. They stayed still. But the thing in the alley, it twitched violently, spasming, retreating back into the darkness, as if something was pulling it away. I didn't wait to find out what. I hit the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. I flew down the road, the village disappearing into my rearview mirror. The second I crossed the town's invisible boundary, my GPS started working again. Recalculating, and then, turn right to return to the highway. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. My wrist burned where the woman had touched me, the mark still hot against my skin. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station an hour away. The clerk gave me a weird look as I stumbled inside, still breathless, drenched in sweat. "Hey man, you okay?" he asked. I hesitated. How could I even explain what had happened? I got lost, I mumbled. "Where at?" "Someplace called Coldbrook," I said, barely getting the name out. The clerk's face immediately dropped. His eyes went wide, and for a split second, I thought I saw real fear flash across his expression. "What did you say?" "Coldbrook," I repeated. I don't know, some weird little village." "No, it's not," he cut in. I frowned. "What?" "There's no place called Coldbrook around here." My stomach dropped. "But I was just there," I stammered. The clerk shook his head, backing away slightly. "Listen, man," he said carefully. "I don't know where you went, but whatever you found, it wasn't Coldbrook." I felt sick. I turned back toward the door, the night outside pressing against the glass. I had escaped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me. And then I saw it. My car. The back seat. A shadow. Something was still inside. And the whisper returned. "Stay." Everyone in town knew about the house. It stood alone in the middle of an empty field, miles from the nearest home. No roads led to it, no signs marked its existence. Yet somehow it was always there. At night, people said, lights flickered behind its dusty windows. Shadows moved past the glass. But no one ever saw anyone go in or out. It was a house that shouldn't exist. And we were stupid enough to go looking for it. Started with Jack. "We should check it out," he said one night at our usual spot, the old diner on the edge of town. "I mean, what's the worst that could happen? We die," Sam muttered, stirring his milkshake. I snorted. "Or more likely we find nothing, waste our time, and go home disappointed." Jack grinned. "Only one way to find out." I should have said no. I wanted to say no, but something about the house called to me. The drive was longer than we expected. The dirt road stretched endlessly, our headlights barely cutting through the thick fog that had crept in from nowhere. The field was dead. Tall grass, brittle and dry, swayed without a breeze. Then suddenly, the house. It loomed out of the darkness, standing exactly where the rumors said it would be. Old, decayed, windows boarded up, door slightly ajar. But the strangest part? There were no trees, no fences, nothing. Just the house. As if the land itself had rejected it. Sam exhaled sharply. "I don't like this." Jack ignored him. "We came all this way. Let's at least take a look." We parked a few yards away and stepped out. The air was wrong. Too still, too quiet. Even the usual night sounds. Crickets, distant cars, the wind were just gone. Then, as we got closer, a light flickered on in the second-floor window. I froze. "There's someone inside," I whispered. Jack squinted. "I don't see anyone." But I did. A figure stood in the window. Not moving. Not reacting. Just watching. Sam grabbed my arm. "Screw this. Let's go." Jack, of course, had other ideas. "Relax. It's probably just some old generator or something." And before we could stop him, he walked inside. The door creaked open, swallowing him in darkness. And then it slammed shut behind him. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. No sound. No movement. Nothing. I swallowed hard. We have to go after him. Sam shook his head violently. No. Hell no. We leave. Right now. But Jack was our friend. And something about that house felt hungry, like it was never going to let him go. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The door shut behind me. I didn't close it. Darkness swallowed the space ahead, thick and suffocating. My flashlight beam barely cut through the dust-filled air. Jack! I called out, my voice small, swallowed by the silence. No answer. The house felt wrong. The walls seemed too close, the air too heavy. Every step I took sent a cloud of dust swirling around me, but there was no sound, not even my own footsteps. Then I noticed something strange. There was no furniture, no tables, no chairs, no pictures on the walls. Just empty rooms stretching endlessly into the dark. Like no one had ever lived here. A cold chill ran down my spine. I kept moving. The hallway ahead was too long, stretching further than the house should allow. And then, a light flickered on upstairs, the second floor, where I had seen the figure. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But Jack was still missing. I forced myself up the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, as if the house itself was reacting to me. I gripped the railing tightly, my breathing shallow. At the top of the stairs, a single door stood open. A dim glow pulsed inside, like candlelight. I stepped forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, and the room changed. The walls weren't empty anymore. They were covered in pictures. Row after row of faces. Black and white photographs, all showing different people, hundreds of them, staring blankly at the camera. Their expressions were identical. Vacant. Lifeless. Something about them felt too real. And then, I found Jack. He stood in the middle of the room, completely still, facing the wall. Jack! I whispered. He didn't react. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Jack, we need to go. Slowly, his head turned toward me. His face was wrong. His eyes were blank like the people in the pictures. His mouth was slightly open, lips trembling. And then he whispered, I saw myself. A shiver ripped through me. What? His head twitched, his body swaying. I saw myself. Standing in the window. My blood turned to ice. Jack's lips pulled into a smile, but his eyes didn't move. And then, from behind me, the floor creaked. Someone else was in the room. I turned and saw the figure from the window, standing inches away, watching. And then, the light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Somewhere in the blackness, Jack's voice whispered again. I saw myself. And then, a hand touched my shoulder. I lunged forward, my arms flailing in the dark. My foot caught on something, and I crashed to the ground, gasping for breath. The flashlight. My hands scrambled across the floor, fingers shaking as I gripped it. I flicked the switch. Nothing. Dead. The house creaked around me, the silence stretching too long. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice that wasn't Jack's. A woman's voice. Soft. Hollow. Wrong. You shouldn't have come here. My stomach dropped. The darkness moved. A shape, barely visible in the shadows, crawled along the wall. Not walking, crawling. The whispering grew louder. Jack's voice. The woman's voice. Others. Murmuring. Chanting. I scrambled to my feet. Jack, we have to go now. No response. I turned. Jack was standing right behind me. Too close. His eyes wrong. White. Empty. And then he smiled. You're in the picture now, he whispered. I ran. I crashed through the door, stumbling into the hallway. The air was different now, thicker, heavier. The walls weren't empty anymore. They were covered in more pictures. New ones. My hands shook as I scanned them, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. Jack was in one of them. His frozen face stared back at me, forever trapped behind the glass. And then, I saw another photo. The blood drained from my face. It was me, my own face, vacant, lifeless. just like the others. A shadow rose behind me. The whisper brushed against my ear. "Stay." I ran. The whisper followed me, curling around my ears like cold breath. "Stay." No. I tore through the hallway, past the endless rows of photos. My own face watched me from the wall, frozen in time. Jack's voice called out behind me, but it wasn't really him anymore. "You can't leave," he whispered. I didn't look back. The stairs stretched longer than before, twisting downward forever. But I kept running. Something moved in the shadows, crawling fast. Fingers brushed against my ankle. I jumped the last few steps, slamming into the floor below. The front door. It was open. Not just open, wide, like the house was letting me go. I didn't hesitate. I lunged outside, the cold night air slamming into me like a wave. I turned back, gasping. The house was dark. The windows empty. Jack was gone. No lights, no movement. Just an abandoned house swallowed in silence. The whisper had stopped. I stumbled toward the car, my hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice before getting the door open. Sam was gone. I hadn't even noticed. Had he run? Had the house taken him? I didn't know. I didn't care. I started the car and hit the gas. The road back felt different. The fog had lifted. The air was lighter. The world felt real again. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I drove until I reached the town limits. I didn't stop until I was safely in my driveway, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. I was safe. I had escaped. Or so I thought. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing the photos. The house. Jack's smile. At some point I finally drifted off. And when I woke up, there was something on my nightstand. A photo. Black and white. Faded. Picture of me, standing at the window of the house. And behind me, Jack, smiling and whispering, "You never left." I should have listened to the warnings. Everyone in town knew about Old Briar Road, a narrow, cracked highway that snaked through the deep woods outside the city. The locals called it the road that never ends. The stories were always the same. People who drove down it at night never came back. I thought it was just an urban legend, until the night I got lost. I had been driving for hours, trying to get home after visiting a friend in a nearby town. My GPS kept glitching, rerouting me over and over. Then, without realizing it, I was on Old Briar Road. The moment I turned onto it, I felt something change. The air was thicker. The trees on either side seemed too tall, too dense. The headlights barely pierced the darkness. I checked my GPS again. No signal. Just static. A tight knot of unease settled in my stomach. I tried to turn around, but the road stretched forward endlessly. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I had just come from the main road, hadn't I? I should be able to turn back. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, there was nothing behind me, just more road, stretching into pitch-black nothingness. My hands clenched the wheel. I hit the gas, determined to get off this road as fast as possible. The trees blurred past. The air inside the car felt stale. Then up ahead, a village. Small, old-fashioned houses lined the road, dimly lit by flickering streetlights. I exhaled, relief flooding me. Maybe I could stop and ask for directions. But as I drove past the first house, a terrible realization sank in. I had seen this house before. Same cracked white fence. Same crooked mailbox. I swallowed hard and kept driving. The second house, identical. The third. The fourth. I had driven through this village already. I pressed the gas harder. My pulse pounded in my ears. And then, up ahead, the same village appeared again. I was trapped. No matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, I kept coming back to the same place. Then I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A man was standing on the sidewalk. I had passed him before. Same posture, same clothes, same frozen stare. But this time, his head turned slightly toward me. My breath hitched. I looked away, my hands tightening around the wheel. When I looked back, he was closer, standing at the edge of the road now. I slammed the accelerator. My car roared forward, speeding past him. I refused to look in the mirror. I just kept driving. And then, up ahead, the village appeared again. And this time, the man was already waiting in the middle of the road. And behind him, more figures, standing still, watching, waiting. I hit the brakes. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't escape. Then, from the darkness, a whisper, a voice that sounded exactly like mine. "You're almost here." The figures stood completely still, blocking the road ahead. I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. They shouldn't be real. They hadn't been there a moment ago. And yet, they were watching me. The man in the front tilted his head slightly, his face expressionless. The others behind him were frozen, their bodies too still. Like the village itself, like the road, they were waiting. Then the whisper came again. A voice that sounded exactly like mine. "You're almost here." A cold shiver ran down my spine. No. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I spun the wheel. If I couldn't go forward, I'd go back. But as soon as I turned, the road was gone. There was nothing behind me. No trees, no pavement, just blackness. I was surrounded, trapped. I turned back toward the figures. The man in the front was closer now. I hadn't seen him move. He was standing right outside my window. And then, he leaned down. His face was inches from mine. But when I saw his reflection in the glass, it wasn't him. It was me. My own face, distorted and twisted, grinning at me from the other side of the window. I screamed. My foot slammed against the gas pedal, and the car lurched forward, straight through the figures. They didn't move. They didn't resist. They just disappeared. Like smoke. The village vanished too. The road stretched ahead, empty, leading into the endless dark. I didn't stop. I just drove. Faster. Faster. I had to escape. And then, finally, a light, street lights, buildings, a town. I was back. I let out a shaking breath. My hands trembled on the wheel as I pulled into a gas station, my heart still hammering. I had made it. I was safe, or so I thought, because when I looked at my reflection in the side mirror, it was still smiling. And then, in my own voice, it whispered, "You never left." I stared at the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. My reflection shouldn't be smiling. I wasn't smiling, but the face in the glass, my face, curled its lips into a slow, unnatural grin. Then it whispered again, "You never left." I scrambled out of the car, my legs shaking. The gas station was empty, no attendant, no cars, no sound. Just the cold, buzzing glow of the flickering overhead lights. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I turned in a slow circle, my pulse pounding. I was in a town. I was back. Wasn't I? Then I saw it. A street sign. Old. Rusted. Barely legible under the dim light. It read, Briar Road. No. No, no, no. I had driven for miles. I had escaped. But I was still here. I spun back toward my car. And stopped. There was someone inside. A figure sat in the driver's seat. Their head slowly turned toward me. And when I saw their face, my stomach dropped. It was me. Not just a reflection. Another version of me. Same clothes. Same shaking hands. Same wide, terrified eyes. And then, he smiled. Not in a human way. His mouth stretched too wide. His lips peeling back to reveal too many teeth. He lifted a hand and beckoned. Come back inside. I backed away, my whole body trembling. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. But then I heard the whisper. All around me, many voices, speaking in perfect unison. You are almost here. And behind me, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Getting closer. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. Because somehow I already knew. It was me. Another me. Smiling. Waiting. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. Just away. Away from the gas station. Away from the whispering voices. Away from the thing that looked like me. But no matter how far I ran, I was still on Briar Road. The streetlights flickered above me, buzzing like dying insects. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then, car engine. My stomach dropped. I turned, my whole body shaking. Headlights cut through the dark, rolling toward me in the distance. A familiar shape. A car. My car. And inside it, me, driving toward myself. I stumbled back, my head spinning. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. The car slowed as it neared me, the headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The driver's window rolled down, and I saw my own face, staring back at me, not smiling, just watching. "You should get in," my own voice said. I shook my head violently. "No, you're not me." The other me tilted his head slightly. "Aren't I?" The air shifted. The whispering returned, growing louder, surrounding me. "You are almost here." I turned, my pulse hammering, and they were there. A line of figures, all of them me, standing along the road. Some were grinning, some were crying, some were staring with empty eyes. And one by one, they stepped toward me. A crushing terror filled my chest. I backed away, my body trembling. "You have to finish the road," the one in the car said. His face had changed. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was something else, something wearing my skin. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stop, because if I did, I would become one of them. I don't know how long I ran, but somehow I must have escaped, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up, in my bed, like nothing had happened. But when I looked outside, my car was parked in the driveway, the engine still warm, like I had just arrived. And on the windshield, a note, written in my own handwriting. It said, "You left something behind. Come back." We weren't supposed to be here. The trip had been simple, just a weekend drive through the countryside, stopping at small towns along the way. No rush, no real destination. But then we took a wrong turn, and somehow we ended up here. The town was perfect. Wide, clean streets, beautiful houses, shops with colorful awnings. But something was wrong. There were no people, no cars, no sounds, no movement. Yet the town wasn't abandoned. Streetlights glowed. The storefronts were stocked with fresh produce and neatly arranged trinkets. And the most unsettling thing? A cafe stood on the corner, its door slightly ajar. Inside, steaming cups of coffee sat untouched on the tables, as if the people had been there just moments ago. And then, Sam found the newspaper. The edges were yellowed, the pages brittle. He dusted it off, scanning the front page. His face went pale. "This is from 20 years ago." I grabbed it from his hands, my stomach twisting. He was right. The date at the top read March 8, 2004. Every chair in the cafe sat pushed out slightly, as if the people had stood up all at once. And left. But left where? I turned toward the window, a chill creeping up my spine. The town was still empty, still silent, until I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A single piece of paper, taped to the wall outside the cafe. It had only 3 words, written in messy, uneven handwriting. "Don't talk to them." I swallowed hard. "Them?" Sam's voice broke the silence. "Guys?" I turned, and my blood ran cold, because suddenly, the town wasn't empty anymore. Figures stood in the streets, dozens of them, motionless, watching us. And then, one of them whispered in my ear. The whisper sent a shudder through my entire body. Too close, too real. But when I spun around, no one was there. The figures outside hadn't moved. They still stood in the streets, lining the sidewalks, their faces too blurry to see. Yet I could feel them staring. Sam grabbed my arm, his fingers like ice. "We need to go. Now." I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe, because something wasn't right. The town had changed. The buildings, once pristine, now looked decayed. The paint on the walls had peeled. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows. Even the air felt heavier. And then, the coffee cups on the tables were gone, like they had never been there at all. I turned back toward the door, my hands shaking. Yeah, let's get out of here. But as we stepped outside, Sam stopped. His eyes locked on something down the street. Something moving. A woman. The first person we had seen. She stood at the end of the road, her back to us. Long black hair. Pale dress torn at the edges. She didn't turn. She just stood there, waiting. And then, she twitched. Not a natural movement. Something sharp. Broken. Like her body had been jerked forward by invisible strings. Sam let out a shaky breath. Nope. Nope. We're leaving. But the moment he stepped back, the woman's head snapped toward us. Not turned. Snapped. Like something inside her had broken. Her face was missing. Just smooth, pale skin where her features should have been. And yet, I knew she was looking at us. A deep, unnatural whisper filled the street. Stay. I grabbed Sam's wrist. Run. We bolted. Down the street, past the ruined buildings, past the frozen figures. And as we ran, the town kept changing. The walls cracked. The windows shattered. The roads turned to rotting wood. Like the town itself was decaying around us. And then, a shadow stretched across the street, cutting us off. Someone was standing ahead of us. No, not someone. Something. Tall. Too tall. A dark shape, shifting like smoke, its body pulsing and twitching, blocking our only way out. And then, it spoke. In my own voice. You've been here before. The thing in the street didn't move. But I could feel it watching me. Its body twitched, its edges blurred, as if it wasn't fully real. Like it was only half in this world and something else was pulling it back. Then it spoke again. In my voice. You've been here before. My chest tightened. No, that wasn't possible. I had never been to this town. I would remember this. Sam grabbed my arm, his voice shaking. We have to go. We have to. The figures around us moved. All at once. They stepped closer. Not walking. Gliding. I turned. The woman with the missing face was closer now. Too close. Her body jerked in unnatural motions. Like she was struggling to move. Like something was forcing her forward. And then she whispered, You shouldn't have talked to us. I choked back a scream. I hadn't talked to anyone. Had I? I turned to Sam, and my heart stopped. Sam wasn't behind me anymore. He was standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by the figures. They had formed a circle around him, and he wasn't moving. Sam! I shouted. No reaction. His head was tilted downward, his arms limp at his sides, like a puppet with cut strings. I took a shaky step forward, and every single figure turned their head toward me at once. A dry, cracking sound filled the air, and then, they all smiled. Too wide, too unnatural, like their mouths were stretching too far. Sam finally looked up, but it wasn't him anymore. His eyes were completely black, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was mine. You've been here before. I ran. I didn't care where, I just ran. Down the broken streets, through the decaying town. And as I ran, the whispering grew louder, until it became screaming. I could hear them behind me, chasing, calling my name. And then, I saw it. The road, a way out. I sprinted toward it, my lungs burning, my legs aching. And just as I reached the edge of town, everything went black. I woke up in my car. The engine was off. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I gasped for air, looking around wildly. I was parked on the side of the highway. The town was gone. No buildings. No people. Just empty road. As if it had never existed. I let out a shaky breath, my body still trembling. Had I imagined it? Had any of it been real? I reached for my phone, full signal. The clock read 2:37 a.m. I almost cried from relief. I started the car, ready to get as far away as possible. And then I noticed something. In the passenger seat. Something that hadn't been there before. A newspaper. Yellowed. Brittle. The front page date. March 8, 2004. The same one from the cafe. And right there on the front page was a photo of me, standing in the middle of the street. inside the town, smiling. And then, just below the picture, missing since 2004. Couldn't breathe. The newspaper felt wrong in my hands, too old, too real. The photo showed me inside that town. But that was impossible. I had never been there before. Had I? I looked at the date again. March 8, 2004. 20 years ago. That didn't make sense. I was alive. I was here. But the words beneath the photo burned into my mind. Missing since 2004. I shoved the newspaper onto the passenger seat and gripped the steering wheel, my whole body shaking. I needed to get away from here. I started the car. The engine roared to life. I let out a shaky breath and pulled back onto the highway, leaving the empty road behind me. I drove for hours, only stopping when I reached a small gas station at dawn. The second I stepped inside, the clerk, an older man, froze. He stared at me like he had seen a ghost. I must have looked awful. My clothes were damp with sweat, my hands still trembling. I forced out a weak, "Hey, I got lost." The man just kept staring. Then, without a word, he walked to the back office and returned with something in his hand. A missing persons flyer. He set it on the counter. I felt sick. It was me. The same picture from the newspaper. Same vacant expression. Same smile. I staggered back. "What is this?" The clerk's face was pale. "They never found you." I shook my head violently. "That's impossible. I'm right here." The man didn't respond. Slowly, he reached under the counter and pulled out a small mirror. He turned it toward me. I saw my reflection and froze because something was wrong. My eyes were empty, not tired, not dazed, empty, like the people in the town, like Sam, like someone who wasn't real anymore. A whisper crawled through my mind. "You never left." My blood turned to ice. I stumbled backward. The gas station suddenly felt too small, too fake, like a set in a movie. The clerk just stood there watching me with something like fear. And then, in the dirty reflection of the counter glass, I saw something standing behind me, a tall, shadowy figure, featureless, grinning, and whispering, "Come back." I don't remember leaving the gas station. I don't remember driving away. But now I'm home. Everything looks normal. My bed, my house. But something is wrong. Because when I look out my window, the town is still there, waiting. And deep inside me, I know the truth. I never escaped. I never left. And soon, I'll remember why. I didn't mean to take the wrong turn. It was just supposed to be a shortcut, an old country road to cut through the fields and get back to the highway faster. But then the clock in my car froze. 3:15 a.m. And no matter how far I drove, it never changed. First, I didn't notice. The road was narrow, surrounded by endless fields and patches of dark forest. No streetlights, no signs, just the dull glow of my headlights cutting through the night. The digital clock on my dashboard blinked. 3:15 a.m. I sighed. The night had dragged on too long. I just wanted to get home. But then, a few miles later, I glanced at the clock again. Still 3:15 a.m. That wasn't right. My phone was dead, so I had no way to check the real time. Maybe my dashboard was broken. Maybe I was just tired. Then I saw it. A village appeared ahead. Small houses with warm porch lights. Neat gardens. A few parked cars. Relief flooded me. Civilization. I slowed down as I passed the first house. And that's when I noticed the clock. A wall clock, hanging inside the front window. The hands were frozen. 3:15 a.m. I frowned. Another broken clock? I kept driving. The next house, same thing. Another clock, another window. 3:15 a.m. My grip tightened on the wheel. House after house, window after window. Every clock was stuck. And then, up ahead, a figure stood in the middle of the road. Waiting. Watching. A tall man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing completely still. And as I hit the brakes, he slowly raised his hand and pointed directly at me. I froze. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his arm raised, his bony finger pointing directly at me, like he had been waiting, like he knew I would come. The car's engine hummed softly, the only sound in the night. My hands were slick with sweat as I stared at him through the windshield. Then, he tilted his head. Not in a curious way, in a slow, unnatural movement, like a puppet being lowered by invisible strings. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to drive past him, but I sure as hell wasn't getting out of the car. I shifted into reverse. The second I did, the man stepped forward. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't walking. He was gliding, like time was skipping, jerking him closer without movement. I slammed the gas. The tires screeched as the car rocketed backward. My heart hammered in my chest, my knuckles white on the wheel. But the road wasn't ending. I should have been back in the fields by now. But the village was still here. The same houses, the same frozen clocks. I checked the dashboard. 3:15 a.m. I felt sick. I spun the wheel, trying to turn around, trying to find any way out of this impossible place. And then, a second figure appeared. A woman, standing on the sidewalk, wearing an old white dress, facing me, pointing. I slammed the brakes. My whole body shook. My breathing was ragged. I turned my head. More figures, all along the streets, all watching me, all pointing. And then, they spoke, all at once. A whisper that crawled under my skin, made my stomach turn. It's still 3:15. The voices slithered through the night. It's still 3:15. My stomach twisted. I gripped the steering wheel, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The figures didn't move. They just stood there watching, pointing, waiting. I couldn't stay here. I slammed the gas pedal hard. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. The figures blurred past as I sped through the village, my heart pounding. I didn't care where the road led. I just needed to get out. The houses whipped by. More frozen clocks in the windows. More empty streets. And then, I saw it. Up ahead. A gas station. Lit up. A way out. I skidded into the parking lot, tires kicking up dust. My hands trembled as I killed the engine and threw the door open. The air was cold. Too cold. But the neon lights buzzed overhead. The station looked real. Normal. Maybe someone inside could help me. I pushed through the glass doors. The bell above jingled softly. The clerk stood behind the counter, staring at a small, flickering TV. For the first time that night, I wasn't alone. I exhaled shakily. Hey, I need help. I got lost. And something weird is happening. The clerk didn't react. He just kept staring at the screen. I hesitated. Hello. Slowly, too slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were wrong. Glassy. Unblinking. Like he wasn't really seeing me. And then, he smiled. Not in a friendly way. In a way that sent ice through my veins. And he whispered, "It's still 3:15. The clock behind him was frozen. The same time, I took a step back. My stomach dropped. Because on the flickering TV, I saw myself, standing in the middle of the road, surrounded by the figures, pointing, and smiling. And then, the screen went black, and my own voice whispered from the speakers, "You're almost out of time." A chill crawled down my spine. The TV screen remained black. My reflection was gone. The clerk didn't blink. He just stood there, smiling, his glassy eyes fixed on me. And then, the gas station lights flickered. For a split second, everything was dark. And when the lights came back on, the clerk was gone. The counter was empty. The shelves were covered in dust. Like no one had been here for years. My pulse hammered. I turned to run. And outside, the village was different. The houses were rotting. The windows were shattered. The streetlights buzzed weakly, struggling to stay lit. And the figures were back. More of them, lining the road, standing completely still, pointing at me. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled. I wasn't supposed to be here. I never should have stopped. I forced myself toward the car, my heart racing. The air was thick, suffocating. I threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbled with the keys. The figures didn't move. But they didn't have to. They were waiting. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I nearly sobbed with relief. I slammed the gas pedal. The car jerked forward, tearing out of the parking lot, speeding down the road. The figures blurred past. The village disappeared behind me. I was getting out. The headlights illuminated a wall of fog. Thick, endless. I clenched the wheel, refusing to stop. I plowed into the fog at full speed, and suddenly, everything was normal. The road was clear. The sky was getting lighter. The trees weren't twisted. The air wasn't heavy. I glanced at the dashboard. The clock changed. 3:16 a.m. I almost cried. I had escaped. By the time I reached the next town, the sun was rising. I pulled into a diner, my hands still shaking. I needed coffee. I needed normalcy. The place was warm, filled with the smell of fresh food. The radio hummed softly in the background. A few tired truckers sat at the counter. Safe. Real. I ordered a coffee, still trying to calm my breathing. The waitress gave me a kind smile. "Long night?" she asked. I exhaled shakily. "Yeah. You have no idea." She chuckled, refilling my cup. I took a deep breath. I was okay. I was okay. Then the radio crackled. The signal glitched, cutting into static. A voice broke through. A voice that sounded like mine, whispering. "It's still 3:15. I stiffened. My stomach dropped. I turned and saw the waitress watching me, smiling, pointing, and behind her, hanging on the wall, a clock, frozen. 3:15 a.m.